What is up, fellow Lost Ark enjoyers? This is Frickyy here. For those of you who don't know me, I stream Lost Ark on Twitch. I've been a Reaper main ever since our launch on September 29th, 2020 in the KR region. And with Reaper's release right around the corner in the NAEU region, I've been getting a lot of these questions and requests about the class, and of course the video guide, which brings me here. There are two class engravings for Reaper, Moon, and Thirst, but in this guide we'll specifically talk about what is a Moon Reaper, how do you build one, which engravings should you get, which card set to use, the DPS cycle, and the whole shebang, so stay tuned. And without further ado, let's get this thing started. Okay, so what is a Moon Reaper? A Moon Reaper is a very archetypal assassin class. You're agile, you got stealth, you go behind the enemy and do some massive damage if you successfully land your skills as back attacks. Apparently in the Western version of Lost Ark, it's going to be called Lunar Voice, but I'm just going to call it Moon because it's easier for me to say. Anyhow, so why should you play a Moon Reaper? In this section of the video, we'll talk about some pros and cons about the class. First, Moon Reapers do decent damage. While they aren't exactly considered to be the pure DPS such as Surge, Deathblade, and therefore don't have the highest numbers, you still do considerable amount of damage in consistent smaller bursts. Thanks to high natural crit from tripods, you'll be seeing those pretty yellow numbers on your screen more often than not. Moon Reapers also have very good mobility. Her skills Nightmare and Distortion are two of the best mobility skills in the game. Nightmare allows you to immediately teleport to the other side of the boss, while Distortion lets you pass through the enemies. And this translates to easy positioning, and you'll have easier time landing back attacks compared to some of the other Entropy classes. Nightmare also happens to be the best counter skill in the game, which allows you to counter from behind the boss. Being an Entropy class, you can stay behind the boss the whole time for back attacks and still land those amazing counters. Last but not the least, and I think this is the most important part, it is super fun to play. I mean, it's really fun. If you're into fast-paced, mobile gameplay with a lot of stuff going on, then this is definitely the class for you. Oh, and let's not forget.
Holy moly.
But just like all other classes, there are some downsides. First of all, Reapers are super squishy. They have the same HP defense rating as Gunslingers and Deadeyes, and I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with the squishiness of those classes. You make one mistake, and that single mistake can spell out death. Also, since you're always going all over the place with your spacebar, Nightmare, and Distortion, you'll be turning the boss's head like crazy if you just happen to have the aggro. Well, you should be able to quickly reposition using Reaper's superior mobility skills, but for your teammates, yeah, not so much. While Moon Reapers do have very good mobility skills, they are both included in the DPS cycle, meaning you'll be constantly using them for your identity gauge all the time so that you can do damage. And sometimes, not always, but a lot of times, you'll go, oh shit, the boss is doing the counter, but I just used all my counter skills for gauge. Or, oh shit, the boss is doing this huge AoE move, but I just used all my mobility skills and my spacebar is on cooldown, and it's a bit sad when this happens, but such is life. You just gotta live with it. Moon Reaper's identity is called Persona. So how does this persona work exactly? It's simple. First, you fill up the green gauge with your skills. Press Z to enter the persona mode, in which you will use one empowered red skill, and then you repeat this process until the boss is dead and the raid is done. In a sense that you get your identity from your gainers and you spend that gauge to do big damage, you could say that Moon Reaper's playstyle is almost identical to that of Deathblow Strikers, yet with less damage but more mobility. You can gain your identity gauge by using your dagger skills characterized by their green icons, shadow skills otherwise known as purple skills, plus your first awakening called Lunar Eclipse Cadenza, which immediately fills up your identity to 100%, plus auto attacks, or just simply walking around naturally refills a little identity over time as well. As you enter the persona mode, the Reaper will 1. Leave a shadow clone of herself where she was standing. 2. Do a back tumble and go stealth. And then immediately get a buff that increases the damage of your next rest skill, and all 4 of these will happen at the same time. Once you've entered the persona mode, you can only use a rest skill or the spacebar. If you use anything else, even your auto attacks, you break out of the stealth and you will lose the damage buff. You could also continue to build your gauge even after your green gauge is full to enter the next stage of Reaper identity called Chaos Mode, but that's for another video. In this section of the video, I will explain how to build a Moon Reaper from relic set to card sets to tripod, gems, and engravings. For relic set bonus, I have 3 words and 3 words only. Just use entropy. Virtually all of Reaper's main skills can back attack, and with additional back attack damage and crit rate, there's absolutely no reason for you to use any other relic set bonus. For the cards, it's also a no-brainer for the most part. If you don't have LOS 18 yet, just use Lost One Cliff 12 until you have them, and then once you get them, you can just switch over. But for us Reapers, we have a couple other options. If you happen to have Umar and Last set maxed out, you could use those instead of Lost Twin Cliff or LOS 18, as they are clearly way stronger than Lost Twin Cliff and nearly as strong as LOS 18. If you're worried about Reapers being too squishy, you could also use the Forest of Giants card set for some additional defense. Note that your Umar or Fate of the Last Nest cards have to be fully awakened to be able to use, and the Forest of Giants have to be at least +9. Now that we know which relic set and card set to use, it is time to talk about the skill build. So where should you put your skill points? So for skill build, you actually have a few different options. There's the Spirit Catch build, which is a little outdated, Shadow Trap build, and the most recent Black Mist plus Call of Knives build, aka the Moonstriker build. It's called that because it takes away Reaper's mobility skills to make the playstyle almost identical to that of Deathblow Strikers. In this video, we'll take a look at the Shadow Trap build because it's the one I currently use, and I am positive that it's also the most commonly used one among other Moon Reaper enjoyers out there. So, for the Shadow Trap build, this is how you allocate your skill points and tripods. As for upgrading the tripods, prioritize upgrading all your red skills tripods since that's where the vast majority of your DPS happens, as well as ambush activation tripod of Shadow Dot, which reduces the cooldown of your red skills by almost 2 seconds, and shadow activation tripod of your Shadow Trap, which reduces all your shadow skills cooldown by 2.4 seconds at max level. Gems are pretty straightforward. Simply take 3 damage gems on 3 of the red skills, 3 cooldown gems again on the red skills, plus all 5 of your other skills. Now, because you only use 3 damage gems, it can be relatively cheaper to set up compared to a Thirst Reaper who uses up to 5 damage gems in endgame. This is an example of the rune setup. Now, it doesn't have to look like this exactly. I'm just showing you guys the setup that I have right now. You might want to switch the runes around a little bit depending on how much specialization stat you got. You can swap the wealth runes between Nightmare and Shadow Dot if you so desire. If you feel like your identity gain is a little bit slow, you can take out the bleed rune from Distortion and use another wealth rune in there as well. Just remember that rune slides are not set in stone, and you should play around a little with different setups until you find the one you're most comfortable with. A little tip though, the general rule of thumb with runes is that you should use higher grade wealth runes for the skills you use more frequently, such as Shadow Dot or Nightmare, and lower wealth runes for skills with longer cooldowns, such as Shadow Storm. Before we move on to the engravings, let's talk about the combat stats real quick. Well, obviously you want high spec because it gives you more damage for the rest skills or swoop skills and increase your identity gain. So you want all your accessories to have spec earrings, rings, everything. The question is, what do you want to do with your necklace? Crit or swiftness? Moon Reapers naturally have high crit from tripods. You get 40% for Rage Spear, 40% again for Last Graffiti, and 60% from Dance of Fury. On top of that, you get 10% from back attack crit bonus, and additional 20% from level 2 Relic and Trophy set bonus. This means even if you don't take any combat stats or engravings into account, you already have 70% crit rate. This leaves us with two choices. You could go spec crit for Necklace, get up to roughly about 18 to 20% more crit rate, and pretty much always crit. Since you don't need any crit synergy, you can reach for the damage ceiling by grouping up with a Gun Lancer and a Deathblade. However, since you don't have any swiftness, it could feel a little sluggish if you're not used to playing a full spec crit classes like Deathblow Strikers or Igniter Sorks. Additionally, if there's any crit synergy in your party, you won't be getting the full benefit from them as you will go over crit. Option number 2 is to go swiftness instead of crit on your Necklace. What this will do is make your character faster, a little more comfortable, and have lower cooldowns compared to spec crit. Since you have faster attack speed, some of you who are less experienced with entropy classes will have easier time landing back attacks. You can also have crit synergies in your party without feeling too bad about it. Note that if you don't get crit synergies, you might be seeing more white numbers. So if you get stressed out when your skills aren't critting, then I suggest going spec crit instead. For engravings, if you decided to go with spec crit, you go Grudge, Keen Blunt, Ambush, Curstall, and Moon class engraving at 5x3. For spec swiftness, you go Grudge, Keen Blunt, and Adrenaline instead of Curstall at 5x3 to make up for the crit rate you gave up from combat stats. Once Belshazzar raid releases in the future and you gain access to ancient accessories, you can add Adrenaline level 1 for spec crit and Ether Predator 1 for spec swiftness. If you happen to get super lucky and cut a nice 7 stone, I highly recommend going Grudge, Keen Blunt, Ambush, Curstall, and Moon at 5x3, plus Adrenaline at level 2. It'll be very difficult to replicate this in an actual raid, but basic DPS cycle goes like this. And there you have it. We have our brand new Moon Reaper. All that's left to do is go out there and slice and dice to your heart's content. But because you don't want to get sliced and diced by the boss yourself and be cleaning the floor, here are some additional tips you might find useful before we wrap things up. Both Reaper's Persona and Shadow Trap works exactly like Gunlancer's spacebar. So you want your cursor to be at the opposite side of where you want to go. Watch closely where my cursor is before I go stealth. You can also do this in combination with your spacebar. If you are in a 1v1 situation with the boss, such as Procol in the upcoming Belshazzar raid, your Shadow Clone can take the aggro off of you. You can use this to easily avoid some of the dangerous patterns that can one-shot you. Even though Reaper is very mobile, if the boss turns right after you go stealth, you'd have to run around to get to the boss's back just like any other entropy class. To avoid this, you can tweak the DPS cycle a little bit. For example, in the Nightmare, Distortion, Nightmare, Shadow Trap, and Shadow Dot cycle, you can save the second cast of Nightmare or Distortion until the end of the cycle to always end up at the back of the boss before you activate the Persona. The initial dagger throw of Nightmare can also counter if you land the projectile on the boss's face. When you cast Nightmare for the second time, you briefly get push and CC immunity. You could even combine this with the spacebar and stretch the immune time even longer. I know a lot of you are worried about not having the second purple wealth rune from Sea Bounties, or whether you have to have crazy high spec or is it a bust. Let me tell you this, don't worry about it so much. You haven't done the horizontal contents, just use 2 blue wealth. You can put that one on Shadow Trap instead of the purple one. As for spec, obviously you'd want as high as possible for more damage, but anything above 1550 is fine until you upgrade. Let me show you why. On your left, you have my current build with 1806 spec with 1 legendary, 2 purple, and 1 blue wealth runes. And on your right, you have 1550 spec with 1 legendary, 1 purple, and 2 blue wealth runes. As you can see, you can't even notice the difference. If there's any, the higher spec you have, the easier it is to recover from missing a couple of skills here and there. You can totally do that. At a first glance at the description, it might look like you'll be doing 20% less damage, but that's not actually the case. If you do the calculations, the damage difference between level 2 and level 3 is around 8.3% instead of 20. And trust me, I did the same thing when I first made my Reaper. Alright folks, that's it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any more questions about the class, feel free to leave a comment. Or better yet, you could join me at twitch.tv/Frickyy when I go live next. I will go ahead and include my usual stream schedule in the descriptions down below. And good luck on your journey in Arcadia as a Reaper, the latest and one of the most flashiest class in Lost Ark. Frickyy out.